You are Locked On Hawks Postcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Man, appreciate everybody for coming through and showing some love on tonight. Unfortunate set of circumstances. Of course, you know I'm DeShaun Tate. Welcome to just another one of those episodes. It is the official Atlanta Hawks postcast, the Locked On Hawks postcast. We ain't got Tanisha with us tonight, but we're going to have her coming up real soon. Got some other things going on tonight, so definitely appreciate the love that she has been able to show, and definitely hate not having her with us tonight, but certainly missing her, that's for sure. But nonetheless, the show goes on, as you know. Couple really interesting things, of course. Tonight we're going to talk about some OJT versus OJL. What does that mean? Of course, we're going to get into that here in a second. That's on the in the first segment. Of course, the second segment talk a little bit about some postseason concerns that we may be having as Atlanta Hawks fans and Hawks Nation. How much do you believe that the postseason is going to be in jeopardy for this team? What do they need to do in order to solidify themselves as a team that gets into the postseason without needing, perhaps, maybe if there's even a such thing, without needing the play-in game, if you will, even more so, even if they do need it. What is something they have to do to solidify themselves for that position? Of course, that's the second segment. Of course, the third segment will be how it won't get any easier. We'll take a look at the upcoming schedule for the Atlanta Hawks. We'll jump into that here in a second, but not before I let you guys know that this episode of the Locked On Hawks Postcast is brought to you by FanDuel. And that is where right now new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. So just kind of keep in mind, remember, I know a lot of people are out there, especially with March Madness on the way, got some really interesting stuff. NBA is still going to be continuing on, concluding for the regular season, things of that nature, getting into some postseason play. MLB is going to be coming up as well with opening day. We got a lot of interesting stuff that's going on. So I know you guys like to put your bets in. Make sure that you go and do that over at FanDuel. Remember, for your first $5 bet, you can win $150 in bonus bets. So keep that in mind. Let's go ahead and jump right into it, because I kind of anticipate, not necessarily, a lot of people say, man, I don't really want to talk so much or hear so much about this Hawks team after they just got blown away by the Oklahoma City Thunder. Not just the Oklahoma City Thunder, but the number one team in the West, number one record in the West by a good significant margin, Oklahoma City Thunder, and 135-119, obviously led by led by Shai. There's Shai and then there's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, leading this league in points, 32 points per game. I think that there was a couple things. Some things stuck out to me. OJT and OJL. OJT on the job training, OJL on the job learning. Curious to know from a lot of you people out there what it is that you believe that this Hawks team did, or you hope that they learned most from this loss to OKC. I think there's not a perfect place to start other than at the top on the surface level, right, where you have an OKC team that is one of the best, right, especially in terms of drafting. I think that's kind of where it starts, right, where, they've been one of the best with their franchise, obviously, Sam Presti leading the way for them, and it's so impressive on the way that they're just so focused. They're young, they're hungry, but they don't look young. They look like a super experienced team. A bunch of guys have been playing together for like years and just haven't won a championship yet. But that's not the case, because they really are a team that's I guess, still kind of seem like they're still gelling together, but it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't have that feel. It doesn't have that vibe. It doesn't have that energy. And they just look like a really much more grown up beyond their years type of experienced team. And I think that that's kind of where it starts at, obviously in the front office with drafting the right guys, bringing the right guys in and so forth, but they're focused together. They play loose. They play fun. and everything isn't about the shot making, particularly with them, or being able to get stops. We know that they're one of the best, if not, I think they're at the best, at least, if not nothing else, being defensive teams in the NBA and obviously in steals and such things. But they have so much fun. So when you start talking about things that you hope that this team learn from one such as this one, you start talking about the chemistry. You start talking about the togetherness of the team, the camaraderie that they have, sticking to their own game. Now, this is one particular area that I do believe that the Atlanta Hawks do pretty well, right? I think that OKC has an identity. You don't get them to play outside of who they are. You're not going to speed them up. They're just going to continue to play their game. If they're going to win that way in most cases, as you can see by looking at their record this year, not just this year, but last year and previous years, but even more so, they're going to be competitive. Right. They're going to be a team that's going to stick to their bread and butter and continue to do. If you beat them, it's not going to be because you sped them up or got them to do something that is out of their character. They stay well within that. So I think that that's, something else that plays benefit to that. And I think the Atlanta Hawks, obviously, it doesn't appear as if that happened tonight. Sometimes that doesn't always play to a benefit of a team because you have to know how to play with some urgency sometimes when need be. But obviously, urgency is one of those things that can kind of get you in trouble. That's not the case, I don't think, for either one of these teams. I think that's one of the very few impressive things, or a couple impressive things that we've seen from the Atlanta Hawks on this year, but something similar that they have in common, mutually share between both of those teams, is that they know who they are. They have the identity, and they kind of stick to their bread and butter. They stick to their game. But OKC also being a team that has that camaraderie, they play their game, they stick to their bread and butter, they have that identity, and it just seems like they have a minimal margin of error between their team. And so, I know that the Hawks is a little bit in a different position with adding some guys, some key contributors that they need to play big minutes for them. Obviously, there's a situation with injuries and so forth with Jalen Johnson maybe not having a backup point guard, which clearly isn't the problem for the Oklahoma City Thunder. But so many guys, key contributors that the Atlanta Hawks need to be able to produce and contribute for them are first time in Atlanta Hawks uniform, where you have a Dyson Daniels, you have a Zachary Risachet, you have a even though he's not first time in Atlanta Hawks uniform, you talk about Onyeka Okongwu, who has, been a first time, starter consistently for this team, averaging 14 points a game, 9 rebounds, 60% as a starter in 18 games. But I think that, when you start factoring in a lot of these guys, Terrence Mann, Georges Niang, Karis LeVert, all first time, first season rather, guys there in the Hawks uniform. So, a couple of things stuck out to me, particularly in this game, where some of the asterisk or keys to the game for the Atlanta Hawks, I really believe that they needed to minimize on the turnovers. We'll talk about that quite a bit on tonight. That's something that they didn't do. They ended up with 19 of those on tonight. That's something that certainly didn't help them. We talked with Tanitra in the last episode about how much they really, really needed. We're talking about minimal, margin for error. If there wasn't a game on tonight where you couldn't afford to make those kinds of mistakes and senseless ones or pointless, or I guess just turnovers that were unforced, right? This was a game where you really couldn't afford that because of the job that OKC does so well defensively. That didn't work out well for them. So they really needed that, especially considering the fact that, you have guys that can, defend Trae Young at such of an elite level, right? You have guys like Alex Caruso, who we expected, although he didn't play, but he was one that we were anticipating could potentially play on tonight. He didn't, but he would have been someone that was going to be trying to yield or I guess kind of contain Trae Young to try and limit somebody like a Trae Young on tonight. But who did play was Lou Dort, somebody who I have to give a lot of credit to because of the job that he has done, on the defensive end, being that defensive stopper with the big, stocky, bulky build that he has. And he's kind of developed and established that reputation for himself over the course of his tenure in the league. But even adding some offense to his game, as you can see on tonight, I think he hit about 6 or 7 threes, which I feel like he's still scoring threes over the Atlanta Hawks right now. But even more so, you have someone like a Cason Wallace, who was in his second year in the league. Adding a little bit of offense to his game, but being able to find his niche a little bit kind of reminds me of what Dyson Daniels is doing. Gets so much credit for the ability that he has on the defensive end, but able to bring some offense where you really wouldn't anticipate it nearly as much. Kind of shocks you in that category, in that department sometimes. That is that combination between Dort and Wallace. And then, of course, you got Shai. You start talking about guys that play defense and so forth. Shai, even though he's a star player and he has the green light on the offensive side of the basketball, he's a guy that doesn't mind getting his hands and his nails, getting a little dirt under his nails and getting his hands dirty on the defensive side of the ball either. So I think that that's something that helps a little bit. And because of that, I really believe that, the Atlanta Hawks really needed to minimize the 3-point attempts from OKC if they wanted to win this game. So it wasn't just the turnovers. Minimizing them from 3 is something that they didn't do very well either. Hawks could not afford to be basically trading twos, where we know that the Hawks' bread and butter a lot of times is not from perimeter, but more so in the paint, being able to eat up inside. I call it hungry hippo. They tend to dominate the inside presence, but they can't afford to swap out 3s for 2s, but guys just not necessarily hitting 2s or 3s in the first quarter as they got down early, 40-23 at the end. And when you start looking at, 61% versus 43% in the first, 58% to 28%, that was from the field, but then the 58 to 28% comparison and contrast was from 3. The turnovers, 7-2, 7 turnovers in the first quarter is already far too many for the Atlanta Hawks, especially in the first half of the first quarter. Didn't even score a point. Talking about the Atlanta Hawks in terms of fast break points. We know that they're one of the top 3 best teams in the NBA in terms of pace. That didn't bode well for them on tonight in the first quarter. 6-0 in that particular category. 18-6 outscored in the paint, which is not something that's usual. And OKC got out to a 17-point lead to end the first quarter. And then obviously, the Hawks over time cut that lead in the second quarter down to 5. But it kind of whole time felt like the, Atlanta Hawks were just kind of being toyed with by OKC. The Hawks needed to make sure that they were winning the rebounding battle, specifically on both ends of the ball, but particularly on the offensive end. Those offensive rebounds were the things that were going to give them extra opportunities, extra shots, extra possessions to be able to extend those possessions. And, it just really felt like the Atlanta Hawks were working a lot harder for their money on tonight. And we've seen the Atlanta Hawks kind of make up for a lot of that, like I said, in the second quarter, but just the third quarter became way too much. I think they go back to the locker room and OKC just kind of draws something up where it's like, all right, let's put our foot on their necks all over again and really just kind of let them know who's boss. A lot of teams, and this is one reason why that I believe that the Oklahoma City Thunder is going to go to the NBA Finals this year. They've already got that extra year of experience that a lot of people said they didn't have last year, that they have this year, as long as they stay relatively healthy. But the fact that they can win close games, they can win games by, large margins. And I think that the Atlanta Hawks should be, it's a learning lesson for them. They were taught something on tonight. Obviously, Chet goes down in the with a left ankle sprain after playing about 15 minutes after the first quarter. But it was good to see the Atlanta Hawks be able to surge back in the second quarter. Obviously, it just wasn't enough stops that they were able to get. But I think it was more so when you start talking about the second half, OKC's elite ball movement is something that really kind of hurt the Hawks, and the spacing just kind of continued and picked up where it left off in the first quarter. And they turned that heat back up in a hurry. And it just really felt like a finals lock. Like I said, they can win close games. They can win games by large margins. I think that they have a chance right now with where they currently stand in terms of margin. They could break the NBA record for winning the most amount of regular season games by the biggest margin, something that was set since 1972. So, as much as we also talk about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and how much he makes his money, I know that there was a particular narrative that was put out there about him at one point in time about how much money he makes from the free throw line. Tonight didn't go to the free throw line until, late in the fourth quarter. Interesting to see that he has scored 30 plus points in 5 consecutive meetings versus Atlanta, the first one to do it against the Atlanta Hawks ever in history that they've been here in Atlanta. But, I think that there were some really good things that the Hawks did on tonight, to be honest with you, between scoring, between sharing the basketball, getting it around to different guys. They obviously didn't shoot it incredibly. I know they tried to make a little bit more of a run in the fourth quarter, but they just ran up on a team that was better than them. I mean, let's just be real about, what it is. So more than anything, I believe that it is a lesson learned from this team. Appreciate Robert for jumping in with us, and the Hawks gave up far too many uncontested 3-pointers. Ain't that the truth? Like I said, it feels like Lou Dort is still shooting 3-pointers on them, and that's Lou Dort. Like, I feel like at some point you got to have a lot of times I say you got to have a little bit of pride about yourself. You got Lou Dort out there hitting 6 threes on you. That's a recipe for disaster if you're the Atlanta Hawks. However, that just kind of goes to show a little bit of how much Lou Dort has been in the gym and how much he's been really working on his game, particularly his jump shot. Jeremiah Gibbons typing in with us. Appreciate you, JG. Go Hawks. Go Hawks, of course. Tough game. Huge discrepancy in the talent. I think that there is some truth to that to a degree, right? But in that same token, I'm not sure that it's necessarily just all about the talent here. I think that just I'm not necessarily saying it's all about the coaching either. I just think that this is a team that was built different beyond the talent, and have, I shouldn't say played together longer than a lot of the guys. I just think that for some of the more key contributors for their team, they've played together longer than the key contributors for the Atlanta Hawks. My dude Time checking in with us, man, saying thunder up OKC. That's my dude, man. Huge OKC fan. Appreciate the love for you coming in and shooting a breeze with us for a quick second. Robert Blackman, the Hawks should learn how to hold on to the ball. Too many turnovers. It seems like the same old song over and over. And everybody knows the big three. And I'm going to go ahead and jump over here to the break here in just a second. Got something really important from FanDuel that I want to read to you and inform you about. But I think that that's one of the biggest keys that me and Tanisha always talk about, is that big three between the three-point shooting being atrocious sometimes, or a lot of times rather, the free throw shooting not particularly looking good. Those are free throws. That's the free space on the bingo card. You got to make sure that you got those, converting on those and knocking those down. And then I think that the other thing is the turnovers. I mean, when you get put in a position in regulation, the comparison wasn't ridiculous in terms of at the end of the game, what you've seen both teams shoot. 50% from the field for OKC, 49% for the Hawks. It's about when, obviously, the Hawks buried themselves in the first quarter, that's for sure. But it's about when those shots were going down consecutively. There was far too many runs that I think OKC went on in this game. I mean, they started out the game on a 15-4 run, followed that up by an 8-0 run that dug the Hawks in. But even from three, 46% from OKC, 41% for the Atlanta Hawks, right? So nothing ridiculous there. Fast break points, 23-14, got a little bit out of control. For Atlanta to be a team in fast break points that is one of the better leaders in the NBA, it didn't appear that way against a young yet very athletic, up and down, running gun type of OKC team. Even scoring in the paint, the Atlanta Hawks had, obviously, which we talked about, needed to be a key piece for them in order to win this game. They outscored OKC in the paint 56-54. But to Robert's point, talking about the turnovers, 12-19 19, just far too many. You're not going to win very many basketball games, not certainly against one that is the best team in the West, and perhaps maybe having a conversation. Obviously, I know Cleveland, maybe Boston, some other teams got something to say about that, perhaps, maybe. But yet, far too many if you want to beat the best team in the West. That's no question from that standpoint. So let's get ready to cut to a break here, pay some bills. We'll get to some other things here on the other side of the break. We'll talk a little bit about some of the postseason concerns that we may potentially have. Maybe what is your level on a scale of 1 to 10 on where they are in terms of not making the postseason, excluding the play-in rounds as well. We'll talk about that here in just a second. Of course, everybody knows that when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. And of course, there's no better place to get in on that action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And as you know, with FanDuel, you can place your live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on the fourth quarter comeback, you can always stay in the action. I do that even from time to time. You can make a nice little chunk of change out of that. Sometimes I win a little bit of dough and I throw it in my daughter's piggy bank. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into same game parlays. I personally love using FanDuel. I'm really excited, looking forward to what we got here. About an hour and a half left until we start getting into, the 1st of March, March Madness. That's right. Make sure that you're not late to that particular party, as you know that is just right around the corner. Going to be able to place a lot of bets in there as well. A lot of games going to be going on at the same time. I'm really excited about it. I'm sure that you are too. Right now, not later, right now, by signing up with FanDuel, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook betting partner of the NBA. Circling back around to you guys, thanks everybody for joining. Of course, unless you've been living under a rock, you are listening to me, DeShaun Tate, here on the official Locked On Sports Atlanta, Locked On Hawks Postcast. Where we at? 135, 119 loss for the Atlanta Hawks. And obviously, some of such things start making you think about what's ahead. Not want to get too far ahead, but what's ahead obviously is the elephant in the room, right? The reason why you play the games, the reason why you play the regular season games, and that is for no other reason than talking about the postseason for Atlanta. And I think that it is very critical that Atlanta, the work that Atlanta has to do, like you start looking at what OKC did on tonight, they did what they were supposed to do, right? I don't think anybody has any sour grapes or too many gripes about that specifically, but the Atlanta Hawks still have to do what they have to do and take care of business against the teams that, and I say this all the time, beat the teams that you're supposed to beat, and definitely put yourself in position to be competitive against the teams that are equal competition as you are, and even some that are better than you are. Make it a competitive game. We saw that in a couple quarters, probably about a quarter and a half, right? For the most part, second quarter and half of the fourth quarter, maybe, to put themselves, a piece of the fourth quarter, maybe, to put themselves in position to where we can see them competing against a team that's clearly better than they are. Postseason concern for me as we kind of look at here where the standings currently are after tonight's game. I think there might be a little bit of wiggle room there as Detroit ended up taking a devastating loss into their 8-game losing streak against the Denver Nuggets. But seeing as to how coming into the game, obviously you have, number 1 Cleveland, number 2 Boston, number 3 New York. And then obviously the group together pieces that are tied for fourth being Indiana, Milwaukee, and Detroit. But these rest of the teams is exactly where right up in this range right here is where I kind of want to put a little bit more of that focus in. We've seen them recently up against the Orlando Magic and beat them. Seen them play Miami just recently, and that's why those games were obviously so important. Beating Miami at home, lose to Miami on the road. There's where you have the Atlanta Hawks at 9, and then Chicago at 10. That if the postseason was to start today, we could be having conversations about them playing the exact same team that they did on last year in the play-in game. So definitely trying to stay away from that. And I believe this is the way it goes. The 7 plays the 8. So the 7 plays the 8, the 9 plays the 10. Whoever wins the 7 versus the 8 advances to get the legit number 8 spot, I believe, in the East, correct, to solidify themselves. I'm sorry, to get the number 7 spot in the East, to solidify themselves for that position. And then 9 and 10 will duke it out in a game, followed up by whoever wins that game, the loser of the 7-8 matchup, to see who gets spot number 8. So I think that, you're in position where if you're the Atlanta Hawks, again, those key words, minimal margin of error. Can't afford to be counting their chickens before they hatch. Can't afford to say, oh, well, just because we beat Chicago before and that, they haven't been looking as good as Atlanta has, that, that should be an easy game. There is nothing easy about any of the games, right? Especially when we start talking about those teams that are so close grouped together, that I believe that Atlanta can beat any of those teams. But most certainly any of those teams, I do also agree, could beat Atlanta, especially in a win or go home type of situation. So where I do like Atlanta a little bit more than I do if I seen them in a potential win or go home situation against Chicago, I would feel the same way against Miami. I think Orlando might be a little bit of a stretch, but Atlanta would certainly have to take advantage of the fact that Orlando's not nearly as good of a team as we saw them shockingly be a little bit on last year. So you got to give them the benefit of the doubt there. But there are some concerns there realistically. And I'm kind of curious to know from some of you guys where you really feel on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of what your concerns are. I think there's big time, concerns about that. Robert saying that the Hawks are lucky that Miami and Orlando are struggling. I agree with that. However, to be kind of transparent with you, I think they're a little bit lucky that the Hawks are struggling, a little bit lucky that Jalen Johnson is out. I mean, we're talking about a team that are, and, not trying to be the super overly optimistic, positive guy here, but just the facts are the facts. I think some of those teams are lucky that Atlanta doesn't have a backup point guard that they can rely on. Getting Dyson Daniels, obviously having to be able to play a lot of that position, obviously, and Wallace to go along with that situationally, right? But I think that they're also lucky we don't have a Jalen Johnson. I think that they're also lucky that the Atlanta Hawks are playing so many key contributors that are first time Atlanta Hawks players in a uniform. So, with looking at the postseason concern in terms of them missing it, I would say that my concern of them missing, I'm not sure that I'll go 50-50. I just think that they're that much better than maybe Chicago and some of the other teams that are below them, the Charlottes and Phillies and, some of those teams. My concern level of them missing even the play-in, I would say, is probably about a 4, a strong 4, maybe even a 3.5, 4, to be honest with you, because I do believe that they got some teams that are in front of them that are going to be very, very difficult to beat. Obviously, we'll talk about that here in a second as well. But, I do believe that in some instances, some of their best, maybe not their best basketball being ahead of them. I think we've kind of passed that already, but I still think that they have very consistent basketball in front of them, if that makes sense. And I'm not sure that we can say the same thing about some of the teams that we're going to see over the course of the next couple of months until, obviously we're in a position to where we'll see some seedings and things of that nature. So I'll give them a strong 3.5 to 4, somewhere right up in that range in terms of my concerns of them potentially even missing. So let's jump to one more break. Come back on the other side before we go ahead and put a bow on this thing. Talk about how it won't get any easier. Obviously, the upcoming schedule for the Atlanta Hawks. Perfect. Thank you guys for jumping back in here with me. This is the official Locked On Atlanta Hawks postcast, and kind of taking a look around in regards to what the Hawks have coming up in the next few games or what have you, handful of games or so, or almost 2 handfuls of games. I think some of this helps them, some of it doesn't. The immediate on the surface level at the very top, I don't think helps them so much, as you can see coming up on Monday. And this is the reason why I say this doesn't necessarily help them. You turn around from having the number 1 team in the West, OKC, and then playing on the road at the number 2 team in the West, being the Memphis Grizzlies, who've been playing outstanding basketball, very impressive basketball from them. Ja Morant or no Ja Morant, if I'm just really being transparent. And not only that, I think the other thing that's been kind of impressive for them is the fact that they have gone from being a 2 seed in the West to then kind of appearing like they have peaked early and just had, being a one-trick pony, having a really good season just that particular season. So they fell down a little bit or quite a bit in that following season, but they followed that up this year. We're getting back up to number 2 and have been pretty much right up in that range consistently. So I think that that's going to be really tough as a road game coming up on Monday night. They followed that up with the 5th team in the East and the Milwaukee Bucks. The 4th team in the East, back-to-back games, the Indiana Pacers. I think last year the Indiana Pacers averaged about 157 points or something really ridiculous. May not have been that number, but I'm sure it certainly felt like that number on last year. Maybe not necessarily with their meetings this year, but I will say enough to say that Indiana is maybe not a contender. I don't believe a true contender to come out of the East by any stretch of the imagination. However, one thing that I will say about the team is that they are a force, and they are a team that I do believe knows how to beat the Atlanta Hawks. Now, is that saying that that they're unbeatable when they play the Hawks? Absolutely not, because much like the Orlando Magic, like we were talking about last year, I don't believe that Orlando is as good as they were last year, nor do I believe that Indiana is either. So they'll play them in back-to-back games, not back-to-back nights, but back-to-back games. Here's where I think that it starts playing a little bit more, at least a little bit, if not nothing else, just for 2 games to the benefit for the Atlanta Hawks, where you have, a Monday night matchup on the 10th against the Philadelphia 76ers, who's 12th in the East. You follow that up with a team that's 14th in the East, being the Charlotte Hornets. Just a couple nights later, 48 hours later. I think that's something that can really help the Hawks. But certainly in that stint of the first 4 games that are starting up next with Memphis, you got to be able, at least I feel like, to win at least one of those games. The Hawks cannot afford to go into, that Philly game 0-4 starting out with Memphis. Perfect world is 4-0, 3-1 is doable, but I don't feel like it's the most realistic thing. However, I do believe that it is doable. 2-2 is where I think that is the most realistic. But one game they just have to get. Like, that's the exclamation point. That's the stamp that you absolutely have to put on the amount of games that this team has to win before they welcome in Philly and Charlotte. And then obviously you got the Clippers right there at the end, who's 6th in the West. And obviously everybody knows that that's tough. And, the Atlanta Hawks certainly owe them a little bit of payback from the West Coast road trip that they once went on. But here's the thing, and I'll end on this note. Here's the thing that I think the Hawks have going for them as you look at this bottom stretch of games right here, is the fact that, all of those games except for one are at State Farm Arena. I know that the Hawks don't necessarily play their best brand of basketball when they're there at State Farm Arena. However, I will say enough to say that that's something I think that does benefit them and help them. They just have to find a way to get on track and get rolling, and having the home court behind them and so forth. They have to be able to defend home court, which we know is very important to head coach in Quentin Snyder. So appreciate everybody, man, for coming through, showing some love for us on tonight. My dude Time came through, showed some love. Robert Blackman showed up, man, showing us some love as well. Jeremiah Gibbons showed up as well and left us some comments. So we're gratefully appreciative of that. We'll have Tanitra back in here with us on the next one. Remember to go and follow Locked On Sports Atlanta all over social media platforms, and obviously go ahead and make sure that you hit that like button and hit that subscribe button to where you can go and make sure that you get all the alerts for what we are here for each and every single game, giving that live recap, post-game reaction, and having obviously opportunity to get some feedback from a lot of you guys. So we're thankful for that as well. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. We'll be back with you guys here in the next 72 hours, hopefully getting ready to get a win against the Memphis Grizzlies on Monday night. We'll talk to you then.